Welcome to Dear Parents. In today's episode, we have three different things that we're going to talk about. One, we're going to talk about the zone of proximal development, which sounds really fancy and academic, but it basically boils down to I have my child's comfort zone, I have their overwhelm zone, and between their comfort zone and their overwhelm zone is that zone of proximal development. And if I can spend my time helping my child there, they're going to expand their skills, they're going to expand their confidence. And I'm going to talk through that with a couple of examples from our family on life, knowing that you can apply this to yours from toddlers to teens and see an improvement in both your enjoyment of parenting, their skills, and their confidence in themselves. The next section of our chat today is going to be with Mallory Whitmore. She is the Formula Mom on Instagram and TikTok at the Formula Mom. And we're going to talk about her new book, Bottle Service, and talk through a lot of the different issues when it comes to formula feeding and bottle feeding and what parents face and why this shouldn't be such a big thing that is so defining for them. And there shouldn't be the guilt and shame and all of that. And then in the third section, I have a question from a parent of a 6-year-old, and he's on the younger side for his grade. And the teacher brought up, could he have ADHD because he's not hyperactive, he's not disruptive, but he is a little bit of a daydreamer, inattentive. And the mom specifically asked, how can we approach this from a dietary standpoint, and what should our approach be? So with all that being said, if you would like to follow along, if you have questions that you have, dearparents.substack.com is the place to find answers, get help, get support, keep learning. And with that, we'll get started with our first part of our episode here right after the music. I want to talk about the zone of proximal development, and I'm going to pull, this has been talked about a lot, but one of the places that I love reading and sharing with parents is the book, The Way of Play by my friend, Dr. Tina Payne Bryson. When I was a kid, one of the games that we played was called Age of Empires. This is a computer game, Age of Empires. You start like in very prehistoric stone sort of civilization. You have this big map. It's all blacked out. You can only see your little zone right there where you're at. And you start with an axe and you have to build a hut. And then over time, you get access to more resources. You cut down more trees, you mine stone, you move around, and you go to areas of the map that are black, and then they open up, and then you can see what's there. There's more resources. There might be people that you can trade with or enemies that then you have to try and run away from to get back to your safe area. You gradually build out the map, and in doing so, you learn more, you get more resources, you advance through the ages. Now, we have a teenager that is driving now, and what I realized is we started driving, and we typically drive to school because ideally that's her main transport, will be taking herself and her sibling to school and back again. What I realized as we were going through this is she's really good, and she even said this, she's really good at driving to and from school. But we hadn't done a good job as parents in opening up the rest of the map to her so that she could see all the other ways to get to school and also all the other ways around town. Like this street is north, and this street is south of that, and street is south of that. Those are things that we had to show her because we don't want her just completely relying on her phone to get her everywhere she needs to go. We need to know Old Cheney is the street, and then the north in a big street next after that is Pioneers, and then the one after that is Van Dorn, and then A Street and O Street and Vine Street and those sorts of things. We need her to learn those things. So when I say, can you stop by the grocery store, she knows how to change her route from school to home to include going down 70th Street to Pioneers to get to the grocery store and then to get home from there. Those are things that we need to show her. Now, this ties in with Dr. Tina Payne Bryson's The Way of Play, talking about the zone of proximal development. And she has a good illustration in here. You might be able to see that. You might not. There's 3 layers. The middle zone is our comfort zone. This is where we already feel comfortable doing things on their own that they are comfortable with doing. This is something that they already have in their wheelhouse that they can do. The outermost zone is the overwhelm zone. This is where they can't do it even without help. And as I was reading this morning and kind of pondering about this driving thing, I took her to get her license or her learner's permit when she turned 15. And I had the temptation, and the place that you get the learner's permit is way across town. It's over a 20-minute drive. There's a small interstate run in there. I was like, she can do this. This will be great. That would have been, and luckily I didn't do that. That would have been in the overwhelm zone. And I'm glad that whatever mental judgment I had, whatever faculties were on board at that moment to be like, yeah, actually merging onto the interstate and then back off of the interstate and going through downtown and one-way streets to get from the learner's permit place back to our house might be a little bit much for the very first time that we're going to drive. That was outside of her zone of comfort. That was outside of even her zone of proximal development, which is the middle zone. So the overwhelm zone is where we're not comfortable doing it no matter what. The comfort zone is where we can do it on our own independently. The zone of proximal development is the stuff that we can do with help, with guidance, with support. And so that is expanding the map and saying, hey, why don't we take Pioneers today? And let's see how to get to school from there. And yeah, you need to move over to the other lane because we're going to turn right up ahead. Oh, okay, I'm going to do that. Now, over time, that becomes the comfort zone that we can do on our own. So we're gradually expanding our zone of comfort. The comfort was the driving to school. The discomfort, but that we can do it with help, was taking a different route to school. The place that we couldn't go was like driving on the interstate on day one. But as we grow, we're able to get more online when it comes to our area of comfort, and we expand our area of comfort. Now, a lot of times parents are reluctant to do this because they worry if I push my kid, they're not going to be able to do it, or I'm going to have to jump in, or I'm going to have to help them, and then they will feel bad and they will not have the confidence. But what happens when we do that is we rob them of the opportunity to learn. We rob them of expanding their zone, expanding their map of things that they can do. This is outside of driving. This is any of the skills that we're trying to help our child do. Maybe it's talking to a friend on the playground. Maybe it's emptying the dishwasher. Maybe it's playing independently for 5 minutes with your toddler while you're over here doing those sorts of things. We have to intentionally say, hey, we're going to move from the comfort zone into the zone of proximal development or the slight discomfort zone, and then we'll expand what we're capable and what we're able to do. And so I would challenge you, and actually before I challenge you, I'm going to say, if you don't do that, your child will be dependent on you. They will be anxious about new things, and we will rob them of the opportunity to grow and develop that self-confidence that comes from building out what we're comfortable with. This actually just came up today. We live in the country, and it was a snowy day today, and I have to go plow our little lane so that we can get out of our house. And I had never had our teenager come with me to do that before. And so it was early in the morning. He wakes up extremely early and had already exercised by the time I was like, dude, it's a snow day. You can stay, you can sleep in. He came with me and I showed him, this is how we have a little side by side. This is how the plow goes down. This is how the plow goes up. This is how you drive. This is how you turn the plow so that it plows the stuff off the road. Watch me do it. Okay, here's the bumps. Here's the ups and downs. I showed him how to do it. We got to the end of the driveway and I said, okay, it's your turn. I hopped out, he slid over, and then he drove the way back down the driveway. He was a little bit nervous about it at first, but he did it. And then he told my wife when he'd come in, that was amazing. That was really cool. I got to do something that I hadn't done before. And I could have just left him in the basement working on his Legos or making breakfast or something like that. But I said, this is an opportunity to expand his zone of comfort. I moved him with support from that comfort zone of, I'll just stay inside and just do Legos or do something else, to I can do that with help and support. Now, if I had told him, hey, just go plow the driveway this morning, that would have been too much. And we would have had the plow run into the house. If he would have done it, he would have just refused. But what we did was we expanded that zone of comfort. And he was like, yeah, I really thought that was cool. I wasn't ready to do that. I did it with help. And now I can do it again going forward. We'll still have to work on all of the intricacies of plowing the driveway because it's a little bit of a hassle sometimes and getting it just right. But that was an opportunity. So my challenge for you is whatever age and stage your child is, I want you to stop for a moment and think, what can I do to expand where they're at right now? How can I help them to build a new skill? Whether they're a toddler, whether they're elementary school, whether they're a high schooler, where am I going to be able to give them a little bit of room to, hey, you couldn't do this before. I helped you. I showed you the way. I gave you some assist. And now you can do it. And really, what I would tell you is that the attempt is so much more important than the outcome. The attempt is, hey, you tried and we learned. And next time when we try again, we'll have learned more. And what you'll see is you, over time, without giving up, that zone of comfort increases. The zone of proximal development continues to increase, but our comfort zone increases as well. And on the outer periphery, the overwhelmed zone decreases. And so my challenge for you is to pick something, comment below what it is that this week you're going to work on challenging your child to, with giving them that scaffolding of, hey, I'm here with you to support you as we learn about that. I would also encourage you to get The Way of Play if you're looking for more parenting strategies to help. This book is fantastic at all the ages and stages, and it gives you so much to noodle on when it comes to how can I help my child to grow and learn and have fun. Schedules are crazy, and it can feel like a lot to try and hold all of that either on your phone or in your mind when it comes to where all the kids are moving every day and all the different pieces, especially as summer approaches and summer camps and all the different things that are going on. It is so nice to have a source of truth that lives somewhere in your house that everybody can look and see. And that is why we love our Skylight calendar. Everybody can look at it and see exactly what is going on, who's moving where, who's doing what. And honestly, it's one of our favorite things because not only is it the calendar, but it also plays a slideshow of our favorite pictures. So throughout the day, we can look over it and have a memory jogged of a nice moment, and also keep the kids' chores on there, keep the calendar on there so everybody knows what's going on, who's going where. Check out the link in the show notes and use code Dr. Boucher, DRBOUCHER, at checkout to save 15%. So today I get to talk to Mallory Whitmore, and she has a new book that I'm really excited about because it absolutely fills a huge gap. Her book is called Bottle Service: Education and Encouragement for Guilt-Free and Successful Formula Feeding. I wanted to have her on to kind of talk about how she got to the place of writing this book, where the need is, and then I think we'll probably talk about some of the big issues that parents face when it comes to infant feeding and a lot of the guilt and shame and all the things around that. So I would just like to open it up, Mallory, and talk first and foremost about you and how you got to the place of, I need to write this book to share with parents about bottle feeding, about formula feeding.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me. So great to connect off of Instagram and connect in this way. So really the story starts in 2016, so 10 years ago. My daughter was born, and like most parents, I thought we were going to breastfeed. Looking back, I'm not even really sure that I wanted to breastfeed, but it felt expected. It felt like, of course, that's what I was going to do. You know, it was positioned as this is the thing that, you know, quote unquote, good moms do. And it was just a mess from the start for the both of us for a variety of reasons. She was premature, and I had undiagnosed gestational diabetes, and my milk didn't come in, and you know, it was a whole thing. And so pretty quickly after she was struggling to gain weight and my mental health was spiraling, it became obvious that we were going to use formula. And being the type A eldest daughter that I am, I was like, I am going to go figure out if we're going to use formula, then I want to be the best at it. I want to know what formula to pick. I want to know how to do this safely and successfully. I want to know how to evaluate if this is like a formula issue that she's fussy or if she's just a baby and babies are fussy. And I couldn't find anything. And at the time, I just chalked it up to being postpartum and like sleep deprived. And certainly the resources were out there and I just couldn't find it. And then my son was born 3 years later. We decided to use formula from day one with him. And I went looking for this resource again, and it still didn't exist. And I was like, that's wild, because you can go on Instagram and there are 50 million breastfeeding support influencers, and there's Reddit threads, and there's books, and there's, you know, certified lactation consultants, and there's support groups, and there's clinics at the hospital. There are so many resources for breastfeeding families, which is so important because it is so hard. But I couldn't find any resources for formula feeding parents. And so I spent another couple of years poking around and seeing what I could find. And then in 2020 launched the Formula Mom on Instagram, and quickly discovered that I was not the only one who was looking for this sort of information, that there's a huge community of parents that wanted supportive, research-based, high-quality formula information.
Well, why do you think that is, that it's so, like, to your point, there are so many people talking about breastfeeding and all the different things about
Mhm.
breastfeeding. Why do you think that there was such a gap in the information out there? Was it that people just think, oh, it's just feeding, like you just follow the instructions
Mhm.
and, pop the
Yeah.
bottle in the baby's mouth? Or
Mhm.
was it in part that it maybe felt like something that was thought of less than, so we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to explain how
Yeah.
to do that. I mean,
Mhm.
what's your read on it as somebody that, has
Yeah.
talked with so many parents and helped
So
so
many
many
parents.
parents
Yeah.
through this?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. I
Yeah,
talked to my mom about it and she formula fed. I'm a twin. So she formula fed both of us in the 80s. And she has always been like, well, what's so hard about that? It's you read the can and you make the bottle and you put it in the fridge and whatever. So she was very low key about it. So I do think there's part of it that it seems much more straightforward on paper than breastfeeding often is. But
sure.
I also think that there's part of it where even though we know from CDC statistics that the majority of US families formula feed, 75% have used formula by 6 months of age for their infant. Nobody talks about it because it
Yeah,
feels shameful. They feel bad about it. But because no one talks about it, it perpetuates this idea that it is shameful.
right.
And then, you also get sort of isolated because you don't realize other people are formula feeding. It's easy to assume that because no one's talking about formula, that everybody is
Mm,
breastfeeding, but that's not, statistically the case. So I think it's a little bit of like shame and stigma that kept people quiet. It was a little bit of what's so hard about this that kept people quiet. And then I also think, especially in the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a big swing toward baby friendly hospitals and breast is best
right.
and, a stronger sense of we should be following the WHO code, which regulates marketing of infant formula. And so I think sort of a perfect storm of all of those factors left a gap.
Well, and I think it's also all of those things for sure. And then just in the past couple of years, there's
Mhm.
been this huge misinformation campaign
Yes.
around formula that has made it seem even worse and more
Yeah.
dangerous and less
Yes.
healthy than it was,
Yeah.
a decade ago or something along those lines, which
Yeah.
everything else would suggest that it's safer than ever before.
Of
And we're
course.
studying it and we have better
Yes.
information than ever before. But there's this huge, like, very shameful, guilt
Mhm.
ridden anti-health messaging that has made it all more
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. And, certainly part of a broader push that we're seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing too, around away from conventional medicine, away from conventional pharmaceuticals, more natural living, homesteader, raw milk, like that whole
Right.
thing. And, I think post COVID, we also saw an increase in distrust with the FDA.
Sure.
And I think, the FDA being the regulatory body that oversees formula, in some cases that pushed folks away. And then, on the other side, now we have the FDA under RFK Jr., which is not operating like any FDA that we have seen previously. And so parents are
Right.
concerned about that now. The parents who previously trusted the FDA might not now. The parents who didn't trust the FDA then might now. Yeah, it's an interesting time to be communicating about all of this on the internet. I'm sure that you feel that way too with your
Just a
platform.
little bit.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big things that I see, and I would just love to hear how you navigate this with parents,
Yeah.
because for a while there was well, breast is best. And then there was the fed is best. And then there
Yeah.
was the fed is default. And it's just, I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of throwing snowballs back
Yeah.
and forth at each other when
Mhm.
we're all essentially on the same team.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
how do you navigate that
Mhm.
specific kind of narrative with
Yeah.
parents that are trying to figure this all out, or that are trying to that are formula feeding and then having to
Mhm.
justify themselves
Yeah.
to loved ones or well-intentioned,
Mhm.
people that are making these kind of unhelpful comments?
Yes, it's difficult. And I think new parents get bombarded with that sort of messaging everywhere. They see it on
Right.
posters at the OB's office, they see it at the pediatrician's office, they certainly get it on Instagram and social media, they hear it from their in laws or their sisters or whoever. And I generally don't find that those sorts of blanket statements helpful in pretty much any context. Whenever, and even if you talk to people that are very staunchly breast is best, they'll acknowledge that there are circumstances where it's not, right? You have a baby with galactosemia and it's just
Right.
not, it's not on the table. They can't tolerate it. They can't digest it, And so if you have a blanket statement, breast is best, unless, is it really best? That's not really the definition of how best works if there are
Right.
qualifiers. And so I always default to, we can talk about what's ideal. Ideal is a much cleaner and feels almost safer emotionally word to me than best, because I think we can all acknowledge that breast milk is ideal for infants. It offers ideal nutrition. It has bioactive components that formula can't replicate. It's dynamic. It changes with age. It changes if your baby's sick. It has all of these cool properties that we can't do in formula, at least right now. And we can acknowledge that it's ideal. Also know that for us and our specific baby and our specific family, it's not the right choice. And those two things have to be in conflict, right? Like I can know also that it's ideal for my 6-year-old to eat carrots without drowning them in ranch dressing, but that's not the world we lived in, right?
Yes.
And so taking sort of knowing the ideal and then really assessing, what are my needs? When am I going back to work? What medications do I need to be on? What's my baby's anatomy? What's my anatomy?
Right.
How much support do I have? There are all of these factors. And so we can know something's ideal and also know that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right choice for us.
Right. I think that there is this, I don't like to just spend the whole episode, complaining about the way that health influencers and online influencers have made life harder for most everyday parents.
Yeah.
But I do think they have in a lot of ways. And I think one of the ways is this optimization mindset that everything has to be 100%. And you have to use the exact right phrase with your child for every given circumstance, or you're doing something wrong. When we know that's not the case, but it sells better. And there's the whole anxiety complex of social media and those sorts of things is based on, you're doing it wrong, follow me, buy the thing that I have to offer you, use my code, or all the bad things will happen. When in reality, we know that children are very resilient. And that throughout modern and throughout human history, it always hasn't been able to be getting breast milk for the variety of reasons. Maternal mortality was a big one back in the day before we had access to, vaccines and life-saving treatments and all these things that have made it more possible for moms to not die and for babies to live and thrive. And so I think that it's hard for parents to take all of that in when they're being told you have to do it best and you have to do it optimized and it has to be 100%. And if you hold your baby this way or you say these words to them, you're breaking them. When in reality, kids are much more resilient than that. And we know that over time.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the biggest contributor to a lot of not only the anxiety, but the guilt and shame that a lot of new parents feel, because it is not physically possible to do everything right. or best. And that's not even talking about whether those things actually are right or best. That's
exactly
what I'm saying. But, I have a chapter in the book and it's called Every Choice You Make is Wrong. History Proves It. And it looks at, there's a picture of me in the front seat of the car. I'm 10 months old. I'm forward facing. And my parents at the time were doing the right best thing. And now we can look back and say that is that's negligent, right? And so, sometimes parents feel so much pressure that they have to get it right. They have to do the best thing. But most of what we're doing now, we will look back and realize is not as optimized as it actually could be or should be or will be in the future. And for me, that gives a measure of peace. It doesn't mean, do whatever you want, nothing matters.
Sure.
But it gives me a measure of peace to say, throughout history, everyone has always just been doing the best that they can with the information they have. Most of us turn out fine. I can operate like that too.
For sure. So I think that when it comes to talking with parents that are I assume that a lot of parents are going to find this book when they're in the thick of it and their baby's 2 weeks old and they're triple feeding and they are really struggling to keep up and they don't know what to do and they're feeling this guilt and shame. And so what is your typical message when those parents find you or find your book or find your message? How do you walk them through that?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's emotional. And I think the very first thing that I like to do is to validate that if they're feeling grief, that's okay because it is a loss. It's a loss of the postpartum experience they thought they were going to have. It's a loss of the feeding journey they thought they were going to have. It's a loss or a mismatch between their expectations and their reality. And
Right.
that it's okay to feel that loss. It's okay to feel bad and sad. It's okay to feel worried, that sort of thing. So I always start there with some validation that what they're experiencing is common. And then I often tell them, I can't tell you how to, quote unquote, fix it. I can tell you what worked for me. And what worked for me was therapy. What worked for me was medication. What worked for me was really digging into the high quality research around outcomes for breastfed infants and formula fed infants, particularly sibling studies. And, in a sibling study, you're controlling for parental education level and socioeconomic status and, all of those other good factors. And the outcomes are not statistically significant in those studies for, depending on how an infant was fed. That was really helpful for me. And then the other thing that I always encourage them to do is to look for the ways that formula is allowing you and your baby to thrive.
Sure.
So for me, my baby was starting to gain weight again. That's great. I was starting to feel more like myself again. How could I feel bad about something that was allowing both of us to thrive, that was allowing me to bond, that was allowing her to meet milestones that she might not have met if she was continually malnourished because she
Right.
wasn't getting what she needed? And so really paying attention to even things like, I can go out to a birthday dinner and my husband can stay home with the baby because I can be gone for more than 2 hours. Like paying attention to the ways that formula is improving your life, improving your baby's life. And, if you're sort of tuned into that pretty quickly, you realize that you can't feel bad about something that's improving your life, improving your health, and improving your baby's health.
I think that is really the wise way to look at it too, is we have to look at the big picture and realize that it's not all just one thing that determines both the child's health, the parent's health, and the family health and dynamic. And so that there's a lot more pieces that have to fall in place for the whole family unit, for everyone to thrive. And when we try and just put so much effort into one specific thing, we're also putting all those eggs in one basket. And then it's really hard when that basket falls. And if we can kind of, what would the word be that I'm looking for? Diversify how we're taking care of ourselves, how we're taking care of our baby, how we're taking care of our family, that it makes it much easier, if one thing isn't working out exactly as we planned, for things to still move in a positive direction.
Absolutely. I talk to parents a lot about this too, where, we hear about all of the benefits of breast milk, and there are tons of benefits of breast milk.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like we get so caught up, some parents get so caught up in the benefits of breast milk that they don't stop to think, are those benefits worth what it's costing me or costing my baby? So is the benefit of antibodies worth that my baby's getting a dissociated, detached, depressed mom? Probably not. In terms of like actual outcomes, we know that, the mom's health, you can't separate the baby's health from the mom's health. You can't separate the baby thriving from the mom thriving. And so, just really thinking about what are these benefits, but also what are you giving up in order to provide those benefits? And is it worth what you're giving up? And in plenty of cases, the answer is yes. And in some cases, the answer is no.
Right.
And using formula is the better choice in that case.
Well, let's shift gears for a moment and talk from the theoretical to the practical. And let's say a parent has decided, okay, we're going to do formula, maybe all formula, maybe half and half formula, something along those lines. From a practical standpoint, you go to Target or Walmart or Sam's or wherever, there's like 50 million different cans. And I always have to have if parents are asking me formula questions, I just have them take a picture, like text me a picture of the can, because there's even amongst one brand, there's 17 different formulations and all the different things. Where does a parent start when they're saying, okay, I need to give my baby formula? What do I do?
Yeah. So I generally think that there are two kinds of ways to approach this. The first is looking at ingredients and thinking about what's important to you and or what your baby needs in terms of ingredients and recipe. So the great majority of infants are going to tolerate a lactose-based formula. We know lactose is the primary carbohydrate in breast milk. We know babies are biologically designed to digest it. They have lactase enzymes from pregnancy. They're not like, a lot of adults that are lactose intolerant.
Right.
So provided there's no extenuating circumstance that would lead you to believe you need a specialty formula, start with something that has lactose as the carb source. Then look for something that has added whey protein. So it'll be in the first, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Cow's milk has much less whey protein than breast milk, roughly 20% versus breast milk, roughly 60%. So added whey protein helps to bring that cow's milk protein ratio up to what we see in breast milk, which makes it easily digestible. And then I always want to look for DHA and ARA. So the FDA does not require DHA, omega-3 fatty acid, for brain development and visual acuity, but we know it exists in breast milk. We also know it's important for babies. So those are the 3 things that I tend to tell parents. If you don't know where to start with those 3 ingredients. That's a good place. And then the other angle is to really think about what's important to you as the parent, as a consumer. So not only just, will this formula work for my baby? Will it allow them to grow and thrive? Yes, they all do. But do I care about organic? Do I want something I can get at the store versus something that'll come on subscription?
Right.
What's my budget? Are there certain ingredients I want to avoid? Or do I have religious or cultural preferences that factor in? All of those things matter too. And sometimes, as parents, we always put our kids' needs first, right? But if you want to feel good about the formula you're using, you should also make sure that the formula you're using aligns with your own personal values and priorities as a parent and as a consumer.
Right.
And because there's 50 million choices, there's almost always a formula that can solve both, meets your values and priorities and also works well for your baby.
I think that's a really good kind of flow chart of how to figure out which formula to go with, realizing that most babies will do fine with whatever you put them on. And sometimes we do have to kind of finagle if they're having side effects from one specific one, or they're not tolerating, or they're fussy or constipated, those sorts of things. But the vast majority of babies will do well with what you find and, fits with your values and aligns with your budget and all of those sorts of things. And I think it one of the things that you mentioned there that really stood out to me was like, can I get this at the store versus do I have to order it online? Versus how do I find this? Because I have this really specialty formula that my friend used that they said we got to use, but it's only available in Europe and I have to get it shipped in.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's not super convenient. And I see all these babies that are thriving in the US despite that. So maybe I can just take a step back and say, okay, this formula that has to be shipped in a special carton and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Great for them. Maybe it's not necessary for me at this stage with my baby.
Yeah. I understand the parent preference sometimes for European formula. There's a general belief beyond formula that European stuff is healthier. European food is better, fewer preservatives or fewer food dyes or whatever. But with formula in particular, number one, there are plenty of US formulas that meet most of those same European standards. So it's not like you can't get here what you're getting over there. But also, you have the risk that your shipment gets seized at customs, that it's been stuck on a boat at the port and it's not temperature controlled. The instructions are in Dutch. Are you mixing it properly? If there's a recall, are you going to know? Are you going to hear about it? And so to me, it's not worth the risk to import when we have really great options here in the US that are high quality. And like I said, they're all research-based. They are all providing complete nutrition to help your baby grow and thrive, no matter what you choose. So in that sense, you can't choose a bad formula. You can't choose a wrong formula. It's just about what's the best fit for your baby and your family.
Now, one specific one that I think is worth spending a moment on when it comes to the misinformation out there is about seed oils in formula. Because everyone hates seed oils these days almost as much as they love protein. And so tell us about seed oils in formula.
Oh, gosh, yes. This is currently the boulder I'm pushing uphill in my content and in my education. So you're right. There's a big anti-seed oil push, and it comes from the belief that seed oils, which have a lot of omega-6 fatty acids like linoleic acid, that they are inflammatory. And while it's true that most of us as adults, especially those consuming, what we call the standard American diet, are consuming way too much omega-6 seed oil. And that is not good for us. We know that. It's not good for us. What's important, though, is that ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. Most adults in the US get it wrong. Infant formula gets it right. You've got the ratio that you need there. And we know that linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid. You can't remove it from your baby's diet and have them grow the way that they need to grow. We
Right.
also know that, on average, roughly 15% of the fat in breast milk is linoleic acid. So if we believe that breast milk is the gold standard, if we believe that breast milk provides what babies need, then we know they need linoleic acid. And the best way to get linoleic acid for formula is through sunflower, safflower oil, or another seed oil. So it's tough. Parents, sometimes they don't want to hear it. Sometimes I'll hear from parents and they're like, I have looked everywhere. I've looked in European formulas. I've looked in Australian formulas. I've looked here. I've looked everywhere. I can't find a formula without seed oil. And I'm like, that should be telling you something. There's not a global conspiracy theory. It's because it is that necessary. All of the greatest minds around the globe have concluded that this is necessary. So yeah, that's a tough one. And, for parents that are of particular concern, you can look at organic options. Those oils tend to be expeller pressed versus extracted using hexane or other chemical solvents. All of the seeds that they're from are non-GMO. They tend to use charcoal or clay to withdraw color versus bleaching agents. So some of those things that sometimes contribute to the seed oil fear, and hear me say, I have no concern about those things.
Right. Same.
You as a parent do, looking into an organic option can help assuage some of those concerns.
I think that speaks to probably the biggest problem in our country period would be that there is nuance to everything.
Oh.
And when we only have, 7 seconds, if we're lucky, to convince somebody to do something based on TikTok or Instagram, that it's really hard to speak to the nuance, because what you just shared there took 2 or 3 minutes to explain why you need those sorts of things. And it doesn't sell on social media when it's just like seed oils are bad and your baby's formula. Look at me at the grocery store. Your baby's formula is full of seed oils, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. And it's always a chiropractor.
Better.
It's always a chiropractor. It's always a man. I'm like, who has
with no
experience?
shirt on and the Liver King or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe we just need to rely upon experts. And it's also the fact that you have to write a book to explain this says that it's more nuanced than just like grab a bottle, fill it with some water and dump it in. Like there's nuance to all of this. And I think that when we have experts out there that have looked into it, that have done the research and taken the time to understand this, that there's a reason that it takes a book to explain this concept, is because it isn't something that you can just get from the 10-second reel on Instagram.
Yes, unfortunately not. It'd be easier that way, but it's not.
It would be so much easier. If people are looking for your book, if they want it for themselves, if they're expecting or just have a new baby or trying to figure that out, or for a loved one that's going through this question, where can they find it? Where should they go to find more about you and your book?
Absolutely. So bottleservicebook.com is the central hub. You can find information, links to pre-order. It comes out February 24th. Read testimonials and all sorts of good stuff there. I'm also talking about it constantly on Instagram at The Formula Mom, at least, for the time being as we approach the release date. But bottleservicebook.com is really the main source.
Well, thank you for creating such an important resource for families. It's never an easy conversation when it comes up at the, 1 week in, 2 weeks in, something like that parents have put all this weight. And I think having resources like you just allows it to put it in its proper place and also express the empathy and understanding that this is not necessarily how you wanted to start your baby's feeding journey, but this doesn't have to mean that there's failure. This doesn't have to mean that your baby's going to not thrive in any way that they could otherwise. And so I think that this is a really helpful resource, and I appreciate you taking the time and dealing with all of the misinformation and comments and hate that I'm sure that you get on a regular basis.
Yes, thank you.
On this topic.
Well, I appreciate you fighting the good fight too. And really, my goal with the book is that parents feel informed and that they feel affirmed. That's the heart behind it. And I think I did a decent job there. So
I think I would agree. And I think that it just leaves me with one thought that I always tell parents, especially if they're really struggling with this, but we've built up that rapport that I can be real with them, is like, guys, if you go to a knitting kindergarten classroom, you are not going to see any sort of sorting by how the baby was fed. And those kids eat the paste out of the jar, like on Happy Gilmore, whether they were formula fed or breastfed or any combination thereof. It is not something that we're going to put on the high school diploma or that we're going to sort by when we're making their seating chart or getting them their future job.
It
Yes.
is important to feature baby, but it is important for it to be ideal rather than
Mhm.
what's,
Perfect.
quote
Yep.
unquote best.
Appreciate it.
Now I have a question from a parent. Now, if you have a question, you can go to dearparents.substack.com to get your question asked and answered. This is a question from a mom of a 6-year-old who the teacher is flagging them as maybe a little inattentive, ADHD. And I would love to just explore and talk through what is going on here, what is typical, and where this parent, I think, should start.
Hi, Dr. B. My son, 6, is in first grade. His first grade teacher has indicated to us that she thinks he could potentially have ADHD. He's not hyperactive nor disruptive, but he does daydream a lot and kind of just lose focus, starts doodling on his pages. He's also younger for his age. He's a late July birthday. We did not hold him back. But we don't have a formal diagnosis for ADHD yet. I was hoping that we could implement dietary changes to help with his focus. Wondering if you think omega supplements for kids is beneficial. He's not one to eat salmon or much else besides chicken nuggets. So just looking for other alternatives to get omega-3s into his diet. And we're wondering what you thought about the supplements for a 6-year-old. Thanks.
Okay, so this mom presents a lot of different things worth discussing. And I think one of the big things is, first and foremost, they said that he's 6 years old, late July birthday. And so he is on the younger side for his class. And right there, when people say, hey, my kid was born in July, they went to kindergarten when they were freshly 5, and then now they're in first grade and they are 6. What I'm going to say is when parents tell me that, it's less likely that it's going to be ADHD. If they were ready for school when they were 5 and they're on the younger side, what we see is a lot of kids that age will get flagged in those early elementary years as ADHD. And simply, if they had not been on the younger side, they wouldn't have gotten flagged. So we know that just the fact that we're going to school as a young 5 or a newly 5-year-old when starting kindergarten raises the likelihood that at some time somebody's going to say, I think they have ADHD. And so for me, that says we should slow things down, because having a summer birthday does not mean that you just innately have ADHD more likely. It's that school responds to their typical age-appropriate maturity or lack thereof with the question of, do they have ADHD, because they're not doing things that their peers might be doing who are 3, 6, 11 months older than them and still in the same class. So right there, I say, hold on, let's slow things down a little bit before we jump on a diagnosis or medications or things along those lines. The other things that lead me to pause for this child is that they're not hyperactive and they're not disruptive. If I was getting to do a consultation with them, I'd be finding more about what it's like at home. But since she didn't mention that, I imagine that it's not that big of a thing and that this might be more of a surprise when it comes to, oh, they brought this up as a daydreamer, inattentive. He's not causing any trouble in class. All of those things tell me, let's just hold the boat, let's slow down, and let's let development unfold, especially since we're not hyperactive, especially since we're not disruptive. We're going to let development unfold and maybe do some things at home to practice executive functioning, which is a big issue when it comes to inattention in particular. Now, she specifically asked about diet, and so I want to honor her question of around how can we make sure that our diet or supplements or things like that are helping when it comes to inattention. Because yes, I'm going to say, let's slow down the train. Let's not jump to get him diagnosed or medicated or anything along those lines. I do want his brain to function the best it can. And if we have persistent issues with some of the chemicals in the brain, some of the neurotransmitters, vitamins, those sorts of things, then we can be inattentive just because we don't have those lined up, regardless of any future diagnoses or how this plays out in the long or short term. I often think about it like, okay, if we are trying to optimize, and I hate the word optimize in general, but I do want to make sure that we've optimized his brain health so that when he wants to, he's able to give the attention that something demands and that we don't have some hindrance that's doing it. The example that springs to mind, which is not the greatest example, is if you have, I don't have one of these, but if you have a premium automobile that requires the fanciest gasoline, I would never want to buy one of those because it requires the premium gasoline. But for whatever reason, they've decided like we need the more pure stuff. if you're using the typical, like I always just look for whatever's cheapest and get that one. And if you're using that, then you're not going to get the same performance out of your Ferrari that you would if you had optimized things. And we're going to try and optimize nutrition so that it allows our brain to function to its fullest capacity and for him to have an optimal experience when it comes to learning and play and friendships and all of those sorts of things. So when it comes to inattention in particular, omega-3s definitely help with inattention. And if we have a typical American toddler elementary school kid diet, we may be not getting enough omega-3s. And yes, you can do salmon. I love smoked salmon, but most kids will not eat enough sufficiently. If they're not having any school issues, if they're not having any big home issues that are outside of the typical for the age, I don't think that you need to rush and put every kid on a vitamin. I actually encourage people not to do that because they don't do it consistently. They don't know if it helps. And so I would rather say, okay, if your child is doing fine, report cards are fine, school performance is fine, at home we're not having a lot of big dust ups, things are going okay, no vitamin needed. If we're having concerns, then I think omega-3s are a great way to get more of those omega-3 fatty acids into the diet, which actually do help in the brain with myelination, with neuroinflammation, with all the different things that we're going to make sure and look into as we're approaching this diagnosis. So omega-3s are great. There's lots of different supplements that are available, both gummies and pills, depending on what they can and tolerate. And so I'll put in the link in the show notes some of the ones that I usually turn to, especially in this age, which just helps to get more of the correct balance of fatty acids into the diet. Other things that I think about, and I don't do like a huge, super in-depth like hair samples or urine samples or anything along those lines. There are a few other vitamins and minerals that I like to make sure are lined up. The tests for those are cheap and it's easy to do those. And what I have found is that when parents actually know, okay, my child's iron level is a little bit low, then they're much more likely to be consistent with making sure that they get their iron supplement, or that we're more intentional about the foods that we're eating and those sorts of things versus just try these and see, because those vitamins will sit on in the shelf, and when we get busy we don't do them if we don't have a good reason to. So the three things that I look into outside of omega-3s, which we don't really test for, we just if their diet supports that they're probably deficient, getting them extra omega-3s doesn't hurt. It's not expensive. There aren't side effects or those sorts of things. Iron, and I've talked about iron before, and I won't get into the depths and the weeds here on iron, but if you go to my Substack, I have specific workshops on iron and brain health. It's dearparents.substack.com to find those. But we know that iron affects attention. Iron is a cofactor in the conversion of tyrosine to dopamine. You get tyrosine in the protein that you eat in your diet, and your body makes tyrosine, but we have to convert it into dopamine so that it can help with attention and focus in the brain. And so low iron levels measured by a serum ferritin, not just a hemoglobin, not just saying they're not anemic, but looking at their ferritin level gives us a clue as to how much iron is actually available for their brain to use, converting tyrosine to dopamine, which then gets the dopamine to the areas of the brain that actually need it so that we can give attention when we need to. So iron is one. Vitamin D is another, and I have another article on my Substack where I walk through a paper that was done that looked at vitamin D levels in ADHD. And so checking their vitamin D level is super cheap and easy. And if they're vitamin D deficient, getting more into their diet, getting them more sunshine, which just helps in general with mood and attention and focus and those sorts of things, or supplementing with vitamin D, great as well. One unusual one that I've just gotten into the weeds on lately is zinc. Zinc actually helps specifically when we're looking at inattention in the kind of ADHD spectrum of things. And so testing their zinc level can be a useful tool for figuring out, are their biochemical milieu maxed or optimized for their brain health and nutrition. Zinc is a cofactor in a lot of different enzymes that are involved in the dopamine and norepinephrine, adrenaline system when it comes to creating those neurotransmitters. And so what I typically do is I will test a zinc level, and it's a serum zinc, and a copper level. And copper sounds weird, but copper level gives us an indicator of the copper zinc balance in the body. If they are out of balance, if the copper level is higher and the zinc level is lower, we know that they can have symptoms of inattention and trouble focusing because of that. And it requires a little bit more nuance, which is why I think it's worthwhile working with somebody rather than just putting them on zinc. Because what can happen is if your child isn't zinc deficient and you say, oh, I heard that zinc is good for inattention, zinc, it will actually drive down their copper level, and then they will have symptoms of low copper. So we want them to be both in balance, which requires a little bit of nuance and a little bit of math when it comes to their serum copper level, their serum zinc level, how much free copper they have in their blood. It gets a little bit complicated, which is why I, again, don't encourage people to just go start buying vitamins that they see on Instagram or TikTok and making those calls, because you might say, oh, I heard zinc was good, or a friend's kid is on zinc and had better inattention. I put my own kid on it and they got better at first and they got a lot worse. And it must be the zinc that's the problem. That must not be the tree that I need to bark up. When in reality, if their zinc and copper were okay, they didn't need zinc, and you might have driven down their copper on accident. That is very into the weeds and not something that you should try and handle or figure out on your own. So in the big picture for this child, optimize nutrition, get them more fatty acids, like omega-3 fatty acids, get them more iron, vitamin D, look at those levels if that's something that you're interested in. Make sure they're getting enough protein in their diet every day, because protein is very tied to attention and focus. And then slow things down when it comes to jumping on the diagnosis and evaluation and potentially medication. I think that's what parents fear. And that's never my first step is, oh, they have ADHD. Let's get them on some meds right away. We have a process that we go through. And one of them is making sure that we've optimized brain health, nutrition, and supplementation wise, and others screens and sleep and parenting approaches and all those sorts of things. Medications can be life-changing and life-altering in a good way for children that need them, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the first thing. And I think a lot of parents worry about that. So that was a very long-winded explanation of my approach for this 6-year-old that is a little bit inattentive, not disruptive, not hyperactive. That's where I would start. And if it were my patient, I would let things play out, checking those other things, and see how the next months and years of school go, knowing that this could be something in our future. And it could be that he is just on the less mature side because he is younger. So hopefully that has been helpful to you. And again, if you have questions, I love taking the time to answer these questions. It is something that I answer questions all day long for parents, but this is really what I love to do. And so if you go to dearparents.substack.com, you can get your question asked and answered.